Hi everybody. Here I'm in front of a universe. My name's Alex and I run the largest and highest rated Shopify agency in Europe. So some of you might know Shopify is an e-commerce platform. And as part of that I get to see a lot of payments and also people, so I've ended up doing lots of speaking at places like Google. I run a general assembly class on e-commerce, Top Drawer, London College of Fashion, plenty of places, which always surprises my housemates because they think I'm the most boring person in the world. We're always talking about things like fintech. Okay. Actually, before I get onto this, so I graduated in 2007 in computer science. Didn't have any idea what to do. Going back even further, I'd made my first website when I was 11, which I think might mean I was one of the earliest millennials maybe, and part of that generation that always knew the internet, even in high school. So, came out of university, I'm studying computer science, and this is a bit of a abridged version of my life, 10 years past there. And went to New York, which was why the sole basis of my career, actually, which was that working for an investment bank took me to New York, which is great. Came back to London after 3 months or 2 months of being told we're the next evangelists and we can make change and it's the amazing new era of innovation. Came back to London, got to a desk where you get sat in front of a Dell computer with a spreadsheet on it, and then you basically wait there 30 or 40 years and then you retire. That's the plan. So I did that for a couple of years actually, but towards the end, we're going jumping ahead a little bit here. So towards the end, what I started doing was getting back into startups a little bit because I'd been a bit involved in that scene and I'd noticed some of the new things going around like Ruby on Rails and stuff like that. So one weekend we had a software release which was for private banking or wealth management, which is where I worked. It went extremely smoothly. So I thought, with the rest of
I think you're both moving the thing.
That's cool. It's a famous game like this actually. But anyway, what happened then? So what happened was we had an audit of the bank's website by VeriSign who had found 30 or 40 things wrong with it, including if you emailed someone a link whilst you were signed in, they would be signed in, right, to your account. So this is the kind of thing that was going on. So I decided on the weekend, okay, I'll use Ruby on Rails, I'll use some libraries, and I'll rebuild the thing. So I'm not saying it's my talent that allowed me to do this, it was just using the frameworks and things that were out there. Came back in, boss said, this is great, you know, what we should be using this. And to cut a long story short, it couldn't be used for political reasons and many other things. So that was around the time I quit and started my company, which is called We Make Websites, which I'm not here to talk about, but that's my sort of day job. And then, so that was 7 years ago, and then I got to know a lot of people in Shoreditch around that time, and I ended up meeting people, for example, that had made websites that were for banks to show important information, and had since sold them to companies and were going to live in New York forever. So that's when I realised I felt like I'd started the wrong business, to be honest. And that was probably the beginning of what we now know as fintech, I would say, which was what I think maybe 4 years ago, something like that. This is my thing called Fintechers, which I've just started up, which is basically a blog. But what I want to do is, anybody that wants to contribute an opinion, which I'm sure is nearly everyone, definitely do email me, because I'm in the process of building up a list of interviewees where I'm going to build up a profile that is a little bit more candid than what I see at the minute, which tends to be press releases and CEOs talking about why they should be funded next, basically, which is useful and does have its place, but I want this to be a more candid and more holistic view of what is actually going on at the minute. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about so I'm going to go through what I think are the reasons why innovation back in when I was at a bank and now, which is not that long to be honest, has changed. So number one, see here, lack of innovation investment from banks. So I think the 2008 crisis meant that a lot of funding was cut in things like research. So the spend on IT as well is already 75% spent on maintenance of ancient systems, which anyone that's worked in a financial institution will be able to back me up on. So the '08 crisis meant lots more legislation, lots more time spent on building new solutions that were not necessarily for the market, but to make sure to fix old problems, basically. So my first point is that there's a lack of innovation in investment from banks that made a bit of an opportunity for the startups. I think I'm going to have to scroll down here.
I'm scrolling it, it doesn't matter.
That's all right. So, two, I think, is the acceptance of the cloud. So, back, well, not even that many years ago, the cloud was a mythical thing. And I think even with things like the Ashley Madison hack, anyone affected? That's a problem of, well, the guy who invented McAfee software, who was also running for president or trying to, claims it was an inside job. And I think I'm with him, actually. I think the cloud in general, you don't hear about these things very often, actually, considering most of the internet is running in the cloud. And really, technically speaking, there's not a huge amount of difference in hosting your own infrastructure and letting Amazon do it. If a good network engineer sets it up, then it should be as secure. And I think, well, I'll come on to this, actually. So, no, I'll talk about it now, actually. So, the other thing I think happened at this time was that people were going home with their iPads and iPods from work. Easier. It looked good though, didn't it? Okay, so yeah, people were going home and then realizing, hang on, the technology I have at home is 10 times better than what I'm using at work, which I think people accepted for a long time. But it started to get ridiculous, I think, when the iPhone came out and things like that. And that a lot of that stuff is enabled by the cloud, and I think people started to realise that the cloud is not bad. And how this isn't working.
It is. It's behind you.
No, that's good. Thanks. Right, millennials in the workplace. So, along with that, I think there was a new generation entered the workplace that were doing things themselves, using apps, taking advantage of new technologies, were digital natives, had used it all their lives, and they won't settle, I don't think, for what is there at the minute. And these are the same people, I think, in general, that are going and founding a lot of these fintech startups at the minute. Next slide, please. Thanks, Steve. And another thing, sort of generationally, maybe, or maybe not generationally, but the thing that I've noticed is that if I go, by virtue of my girlfriend, I'm able to go to some very upper middle class do's, which they would never let me in for otherwise. And I've noticed that, along with being a doctor, a lawyer, or working for a big accounting firm or a bank, the startup has actually become a legitimate career route, which I think is amazing. Because even when I quit my job and started a company, it was still a bit of a weird thing to do. And obviously things like Google were around, but it's not like now where startups, people are, it's mainstream, basically. And I think that has also been helped by Tech City and the whole government innovation there, which at the time I was a bit apprehensive about, because I thought having a company was all about practical things like getting lower rents and lower business rates and stuff. But I actually realised the PR that came behind the whole Tech City movement was actually vital in making London such a competitive place when it comes to startups. So my final slide is response to the hubris of old finance. So, yes, revolution. Along with a kind of, along with the fact that companies like, say, TransferWise or a lot of these new startups are, I think, starting from a position of being more ethically sound, in my opinion. I mean, time will tell. We know Google now, for example, is more of an amoral, very pro-capitalist entity that is lobbying, probably the first or second highest lobbyer in Washington. But for now, these startups seem good and seem like they're coming from a good place. And I also have a belief that smaller companies exhibit the ideals of a human being more than a big company, where a big company becomes increasingly robotic, just a profit-seeking organism, if you like, or function. Whereas a smaller company tends to be a little bit more intuitive. So I think the interesting thing is that things like price transparency and things like financial inclusion from, say, mobile banking in Africa are absolutely brilliant. And there'll be a lot more of that in fintech. I also wonder if the kind of Russell Brand-esque sort of tapping into the fact that we're paying at the height nearly £1 billion to bail out the banks people are not in a great mood about old finance. The other thing is that they are starting to realise that they don't understand why their bank app doesn't do what they can get from other things like Facebook, as in feature-wise. And the new crop of mobile banking, for example, or other financial services, or things for transferring for FX, or taking payments, are many, many times better than what was there before. And I think that's because startups have a much closer and better way of being in tune with what the market wants. Whereas the bank is, by virtue of having a lot of people, almost necessarily inward focused, because most people are dealing with other people in the bank. A startup lives or dies based on its ability to put a proposition together that the market is in favour of, and that is embodied in things like the lean startup, if any of you are aware of that, and other methodologies like that, which are quite new really. So those are my 5 reasons why now for fintech. Like I say, this is a kind of an experimental blog that I'm doing in my spare time, but I'm hoping it's going to go somewhere. So if you want to contribute, do email me. It's alex@fintechers.io, which I think I've coined. I don't know, maybe I haven't coined that, but I will trademark it before someone else does, hopefully. And that's it for me. Thanks.